If you have watched any of my videos, especially the ones on the custom class designs, then you probably have heard me complain about how Blizzard seems to shove almost every ranged weapon idea or archetype into Hunter, making Hunter the only class with ranged weapons, and then they take away the ranged weapon is from one of their specializations, so even the Hunter isn't the ranged weapon class. And a lot of my potential future WoW class videos are about ranged weapon users, but I have one more. I have yet another ranged weapon class that is canon, and that is being cannibalized by other classes. Like they were trying to make you forget about it. And this is still one of my top future class concepts, and I'm going to show you why. And this class is the Ranger. Now, I can hear you asking, isn't this literally just the Hunter? Well, if your idea of Hunter or Ranger is just ranged weapons, it might be, but that really describes neither of these two. The core identity of the Hunter started as the pet class. Back in Vanilla WoW, before much of the class design was really crystallized, many classes could use the ranged weapons. Of course, it wasn't very optimal for many of them, or they were just a stat stick, but it wasn't the sole identity the Hunter was built around. It was literally originally built around the pets. And sure, you can have your lone wolf marksmanship hunters today, but they're a subversion of what the class was built around. Now the question is, if the Ranger isn't a hunter, then what is it? And if the only Ranger you're familiar with is the D&D Ranger, you can be forgiven for thinking they're very similar. The D&D Ranger can use ranged weapons or melee weapons like the iconic Dristo Urden. I don't really know how his last name is pronounced. I don't really recall hearing his name spoken, his full name spoken aloud. Sure, people have said Drist in video games, but Taylor Durden. That's what I'm calling him now. The D&D Ranger can have animal companions, animal empathy abilities, and you can see how probably the D&D Ranger inspired a lot of the WoW Hunter. But what if I told you there was a WarCraft Ranger in the lore who was different? In WarCraft 3 there was one hero unit that was explicitly called Ranger, and while it had some slight resemblance to the D&D Ranger, the end result was coming off as something of its own. The unit didn't make it into the multiplayer matches, it wasn't playable in the campaign, but we saw what remained of this unit in the Living Sylvanas in the Undead campaign. Her abilities were a Scout Owl, Cold Arrows, True Shot Aura, and Starfall. And most of these abilities, since the original Ranger was cancelled, were taken later by other units. However, two things to note here. This setup of abilities gives us an idea of the original Ranger's identity. They have ranged weapons, but they also have arcane magic. They can summon a beast, but they don't tame a regular beast like a hunter, and instead summon a spirit beast. Starfall has been taken by druids later, and though this may hint at some low-level nature connection, it hints more at Blizzard at some point confusing druids with priestesses of the moon, only the latter of which originally did arcane, but that is a whole other topic. You see an emergent identity of a ranged weapon arcane magic user. The second thing to note is Cold Arrows. It has been taken by another unit, but that unit is the Naga Sea Witch. No one in WoW currently uses this kind of ability really. These enchanted or conjured arrows, yes, you can enhance your arrows in different ways, but they are more technological. And that brings us to the next point, which is there are actually a few more hero units that fit this emergent identity. And though they have not been explicitly called Rangers in canon, you will see they share a lot with it. These units are Priestess of the Moon, Naga Sea Witch, Shadow Hunter, and Dark Ranger. what they all share is connection to magic and ranged weapon use. The Shadow Hunter is the furthest out of those, because they feel more natural elemental than arcane. So we can maybe cross them out, but between the remaining three we have a whole roster of characters who have the similar kind of skills. Yes, they have not been canonically all identified as the same class, but we can all see the skill set they share. And at the core of it lies that one unused ability, the Conjured Arrows. So if we analyze all these, try to distill their common elements, and create a coherent class design, what do we end up with? And this is what has been one of my oldest class designs that I have been using in my TTRPG, and which can also work in WoW itself. Ranger is a DPS and support class, using melee armor and bows, crossbows, and rifles, but are also for transmog purposes capable of wearing lower armor classes and most one-handed melee weapons, including warglaves. Most ranger specializations use intellect as their primary attribute, because in the end the ranger is a caster with a bow, who uses their magic to supplement their weapon skills. They probably don't need a fancy new resource and can just use mana, but if we have to call every new class's resource something different, we can always make up some word like conflux. I don't know, conflux, that's it. Though all the inspirations and examples were elves or elf offshoots, there's no reason why other races can't pick it up. Any race with significant arcane magic use and a history of archers should be able, in theory, to come up with this kind of discipline. Maybe they'd be less common among the more techie races like modern orcs or gnomes or goblins, but overall I stand by the design that racial restrictions are very rarely necessary these days. Just about the only race class combos I'd have objections to would be something like undead paladins or light forged Draenei warlocks. Who would do that? Wait a moment. Like most classes in WoW, the Ranger has 3 specializations, and when coming up with those, I asked myself a question. What are the key things that make up the Ranger's identity? And those are bows and arcane magic. So, what if the specializations are about using magic to enhance your arrows, or using arrows to enhance your magic? The first specialization is the Arcane Archer. This is the one that really focuses on the magic side. Their key ability, Conjured Arrows, gets more options. Instead of getting just flaming arrows that deal more damage with their auto attacks, or frost arrows which slow their targets, they can get, for example, lightning arrows which have a small chance to stun, or charm arrows which can prevent the target from attacking you briefly. It's not all about arrows, of course, as they can call down weather-themed effects, such as lightning strikes on an area, or an obscuring fog, or a patch of mud or sleet to slow down enemies. Rangers are still the survival masters, so in tandem with magic, they know how to manipulate the environment for their own benefit. The second specialization is the reverse side of this dual identity, and is what I call the True Shot specialization. While the actual True Shot aura ability has been taken by the Hunters, it's not like that hasn't happened before. We had Death Coil taken by the Warlocks, and then reappear slightly differently on Death Knights, or how Metamorphosis was briefly stolen by, Warlocks again. Warlocks like to steal abilities from other classes, apparently. Metamorphosis was briefly stolen by Warlocks until Demon Hunters took it back. So it's not very hard to imagine the second Ranger specialization focusing on using the magic to simply enhance the actual weapon ability. These focus on firing fast, firing hard, getting more extra attacks. Maybe this specialization actually uses agility as their primary attribute. Not that those are extremely important in WoW anymore. The True Shot might also be manipulating the enemies in the field by pinning them down or displacing them around the field. Haste and AoE are the primary modes of operation, and I like to imagine that the True Shot Ranger would depend more on their auto attacks, on just the pure white damage that is being either enhanced, increased, or or happening more often thanks to all their enhancement, their self-enhancements. It might be a little bit hard to balance to have a class depend, or a specialization of a class depend largely on the auto attacks, but I'm sure we have done harder things. Now, I have briefly considered a melee ranger specialization. One of the most iconic rangers in popular culture is, after all, Grist, whose last name I still can't pronounce. And the D&D ranger is very well capable of melee combat. After all, the real reason the ranger is called that is not because of ranged weapons, but because they range around. They move around a lot in the wilderness. However, this ranger in the end has a very different identity, so we're not doing that. So for the third specialization, I had to go outside mixing those two prior elements together and think what else would complement those two prior specializations well. So instead, the last specialization, which you might have noticed when I talked about the roles they can perform, is a support spec. I call this one tentatively the Fast Rider. Now, perhaps it's not a full-on augmentation evoker style support spec, but it mixes a little bit of their support functionalities, such as enhancing cooldowns and buffing haste and multi-strike, even if they don't call it multi-strike specifically, with actual healing and barrier abilities. The Fast Rider Ranger will call down magical shields and wind barriers to protect you, and use some basic nature magic to heal you, and also enhance your other abilities. They are, in the end, somewhere between a full-on support spec and a healer spec. You might also be asking, you started this by talking about the WarCraft III hero units that inspired this design, so why aren't those the specializations? And that simply is because they're the hero talents. Remember now, post-war within, every class needs its hero talents, and those 3 hero units that inspired this are better suited for hero talents. Fast Riders or Support Rangers and True Shot DPS can both adopt the Priestess of the Moon hero talent. Because this is WoW, any race can take this up, but of course, due to their lore, they focus largely on support abilities. They will still shoot you and enhance their arrows with fire, but the Priestess of the Moon is there to call on Elune to protect their allies and bless them and reveal any evil lurking within their forest with their scout owl, or to call on a divine intervention to undo some damage or some big CC that went off badly. Fast Riders and Arcane Archers can both learn from the Sea Witches and adopt their hero talent. And I can only hope we would have playable Naga by then. Sea Witches really focus on all the magical aspects of the Ranger, becoming even more of a mage with a bow, giving them more spellcasting, focusing more on the environmental manipulation and protection, like all the typhoons and fork lightning. Sorry, chain lightning was different, it was separate. For the fork lightning, and all the specifically more magical abilities, and maybe focus more on the mana shield. Finally, Arcane Archers and True Shots can both become Dark Rangers. You could argue Dark Rangers have enough lore and unique mechanics and style to really be a class of their own, but let's look at Dark Rangers in WoW at the moment. We got a bunch of customization options to make us look like Dark Rangers, and then in War Within they become a Hunter hero talent? I have talked about this in other videos before, but the only thing they have in common is bow. Dark Rangers really are not hunters, so I am giving them as a hero talent to the actual Ranger main class, without a lot of changes. Except now that Dark Minion can actually be a skeleton, like in WarCraft 3, instead of some random beast to make it make sense with hunters. But if Rangers get the Dark Ranger as a hero talent, are we just removing one from hunters? I have thought about it and invented a new hero talent for hunters to replace it. Now, what else can fit between Beastmaster hunters and Marksmanship hunters, or rather, what can actually fit there? And there comes the idea of Nomad. This is the mounted combat hero talent for hunters, making your pets larger and allowing you to mount them in combat, giving you abilities focusing on shuffling damage and effects off into the mount, and giving you increased mobility. Would it possibly be a nightmare to balance? Maybe a little bit, but it's also a really cool idea. And here we go, a full Ranger class write-up with all the unique class mechanics, specializations, and hero talents, and all the unique lore backgrounds. It is a class with good canon backing. Even if it hasn't been made an explicit connection, it does present a unique playstyle and a unique character archetype we don't really have yet in WoW. And having done that, I have really run dry of any ranged weapon classes I had in my back pocket, and most of the big class concepts I had in my mind for years. There are still a few ideas out there for different classes we could see with prior lore backing, and there are other class design related things I could talk about. There are, in my system, other classes of course, Blackguards and Void Reavers and Graven Ones who fill different niches, but some of them I had to just make up almost entirely, and I don't want to make videos about things that are just pure fanfiction, but design is based on the canon lore. If, nevertheless, you would like to see those more original designs, do let me know in the comments below. Or maybe you think this whole idea is stupid and we don't need rangers because we already have one class with a bow and that is enough for any and all bow ideas. But if you did like it, don't forget to like and subscribe and all that jazz. I hope to see you next time with more lore videos. And until then, let's have some more copium, my fellow WarCraft grognards. I'll see you next time.